Stretch and challenge. Overview. Part 1. What is stretch and challenge? We're going to be looking at some key concepts and strategies to employ stretch and challenge. Part 2. Identifying pupil A. Looking at a pupil who would benefit from stretch and challenge strategies. Part 3. Strategies implemented for pupil A. Looking at how pupil A has responded to the stretch and challenge strategies in place. And Part 4. Conclusion. Part 1. What is stretch and challenge? The philosophy. Stretch and challenge refers to providing appropriate learning experiences that extend pupils' thinking beyond their current level of performance through higher expectations, scaffolded support, and higher order questioning. I'll be looking at three theorists, Dewey, Dweck, and Vygotsky. Experience in Education, Dewey, 1938. Dewey argues that education should be grounded in meaningful experiences that promote intellectual growth. However, he emphasizes that not all experiences are educational. Teachers must carefully plan and guide learning so that experiences connect with pupils' prior knowledge and encourage future learning for the principle of continuity. Rather than promoting unrestricted freedom, Dewey argues that effective teaching balances pupil inquiry with teacher guidance to create purposeful educational experiences. Mind and Society, the Development of Higher Psychological Processes, Vygotsky, 1978. Vygotsky argues that pupils learn most effectively when tasks are situated within their zone of proximal development, where appropriate teacher or peer support enables them to achieve beyond their current independent capabilities. This can be applied through scaffolded questioning, modelling, and collaborative learning, gradually withdrawing support as pupils develop confidence and competence. This aligns with stretch and challenge by ensuring that tasks are sufficiently demanding to extend pupils' thinking while remaining accessible through purposeful guidance. Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, by Dweck, 2006. Dweck proposes that learners' beliefs about their intelligence influence how they respond to challenge. Pupils with a growth mindset are more likely to engage with difficult tasks, persist following setbacks, and use feedback to improve their performance. However, Dweck argues that improvement depends not simply on effort, but on effective strategies, high-quality feedback, and sustained persistence. How theories link to stretch and challenge. Dewey's theory contributes to stretch and challenge through meaningful inquiry. Vygotsky's theory contributes through scaffolded support, and Dweck's theory contributes through positive responses to difficulty. Part 2. Looking at a pupil who would benefit from stretch and challenge strategies. Pupil A profile. Pupil A is a Year 9 pupil with low prior attainment in art. He lacks confidence in art and is diagnosed with ADHD. He frequently disengages and is distracted after finishing his work, however has a very strong potential for conceptual understanding, but is reluctant to take risks out of fear of failure or being wrong. Student A was selected because they have demonstrated untapped potential but avoided challenge due to low confidence, making them an appropriate case study for evaluating stretch and challenge strategies. The classroom environment. The classroom environment, a few students were managed moves from another school. Others chose art because of a lack of choice. Therefore, within the classroom, the ability ranges from capability to do completely independent work to high dependency for a teacher or LSA to help. Student A is one of the latter. He generally asks for help even when he is able to complete a task himself. One of my goals in this study is so that he can work independently. Part 3. Strategies implemented. Overview of the term. Over the course of this term, the Year 9s have been looking at their identities specifically within their environment. This is through the eyes of Basquiat and Diego Rivera. I created this scheme of work intentionally to train the Year 9s how to implement their surroundings into a piece of work, which they will have to do consistently within their GCSEs. Students had painted perhaps once or twice before, once in Year 7 for colour theory, and once in Year 8 with watercolour. Therefore, when we started the project, it was an opportunity to connect prior knowledge and enforce new learning for the future. Weeks 1 to 3. As Dewey reflects that learning occurs through meaningful experiences, I have tailored this scheme of learning to subjects and themes that the students are able to relate towards, carefully structured in separate parts to avoid child-centered unstructured freedoms. First, we looked at how students could understand their own identity by looking into their heritage, their material manifestations like their tastes in fashion and music, their internal self, and the issues that they care about within the world. The task was set to identify these traits in pictorial form for their design. I chose Dewey's strategy of learning through experience to help student A become aware that art isn't just about realism, but it can be about identity and the portrayal of self. Following Dewey's strategy through inquiry, I guided them to a specific example of Chris Offaly, who painted a mural in the Tate Britain about the tragedy of Grenfell Tower. Because many of the students had either grown up in the area of Ladbroke Grove as well as spent time there because of how close the school is located, this specific example of an environment shaping the perception of the world and oneself was a strong one for students to question how a place can have an immense impact on their sense of identity. After gathering collections of photographs, students began making thumbnail sketches and combining aspects of their environment to make up a complete landscape. I then introduced a lesson on collage to help students with composition and placement, guiding them structurally through the process of design, assessing their prior knowledge on proportion and composition, and teaching them the differences between composition in a landscape and of the face and object. This allowed me to activate Dewey's principle of teacher guidance and continuity, helping students and student A learn by building on past experiences and preparing for future learning, as well as Vygotsky's scaffolded tasks for student zones of proximal development. Throughout this process, however, student A required continual prompting. Weeks 3 to 5. Student A's progression on his painting improved once he was intrinsically motivated by the subject matter. He began coming in at lunch breaks to work on his painting and practice mixing colours. This was also influenced by the feedback I have consistently written after every class, giving students the ability to engage with my advice. The feedback that I gave was direct, focusing on the problems that they could solve within their painting, reinforcing Dweck's focus on the growth mindset rather than the empty praise. I chose this strategy because student A lacked confidence and required cognitive scaffolding before attempting independent artistic decisions. Weeks 5 to 7. Throughout the final stages of the project, I encouraged students at the end of every class to do a gallery walk and write down what went well and, even better if, for their peers' work. The feedback that was given directly engaged students to become involved in each other's work. This made the project more communal and supportive. Reinforcing Vygotsky's theory of zones of proximal development scaffolded some of the feedback at the beginning of the project. However, with the last few weeks, students gave each other feedback and slowly started to learn how to contextualize and assess their own paintings. Part 4. Conclusion. Impacts of Stretch and Challenge. Increased independent engagement within art. Student A began to become more and more confident throughout the term and became independent with his iconography and techniques, such as including some of his possessions and people within the painting, using carbon paper and creating his own colour palettes. Student A also came into the classroom to work on his classwork and practice painting steadily every week. Development of creative confidence. Despite not feeling confident at the beginning of the project, Student A practiced and worked hard to improve his technique. This increased his pride in his work, and therefore he took more care and reflected when he was painting. Greater willingness to experiment artistically. Not many students were able to incorporate their possessions and people into their paintings. Student A felt passionate to try and see how things would work. He was learning through mistake-making. At first, he became less motivated, but throughout time, he became motivated at trying to make the painting better. Evidence of intrinsic motivation. As mentioned previously, Student A has been coming in at break times and asking for specific advice in regards to painting. He has also become more engaged with techniques and how to achieve certain effects with paint independently. Why did these strategies work? Dewey's strategy for students' experience and environment to enhance their learning through teacher guidance saw improvements in Student A's intrinsic motivation and engagement. Vygotsky's strategy of modelling and using scaffolded worksheets reduced the amount of prompts that Student A required over time, and gradually his independence increased. Dweck's strategy of process-focused feedback increased pupil A's motivation to experiment and acceptance to make mistakes. In conclusion, this investigation has highlighted that Stretch and Challenge not be viewed as providing more difficult work, but as creating opportunities for pupils to think critically, reflect on their learning, and develop independence through appropriate scaffolded support. Student A's progress demonstrated that Challenge was most successful when high expectations were balanced with guidance, encouragement, and opportunities for creative exploration. Although further evidence across a wider range of pupils would strengthen these findings, this experience has developed my understanding for how educational theory can be translated into classroom practice. As a developing teacher, I recognize that effective stretch and challenge requires continual reflection, adaptation, and responsiveness to pupils' individual strengths and barriers to learning.